Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something pretty fundamental to understanding global change: invasive alien plants and specifically their ecological impact. It's a huge issue. And for this deep dive, we're focusing on a really seminal piece of work, the 2011 meta-analysis led by Montserrat Vilà. The title is Ecological Impacts of Invasive Alien Plants, a meta-analysis of their effects on species, communities, and ecosystems. Quite a mouthful, but really important.
Absolutely. It was necessary. For a long time, research focused a lot on how invasions happen, the pathways, why some species take hold. But what was missing was a solid quantitative way to actually measure the damage these invaders cause globally. We needed a framework to predict impacts, not just describe arrivals.
Right, moving beyond just knowing they are bad to quantifying how bad and where.
Exactly. So the mission here, following Viola's team, was to synthesize all that data, look for the big picture, the large-scale patterns. We needed hard numbers.
And it was a serious synthesis, wasn't it? The scale is pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah. They pulled together data from 199 different studies. That covered 10,041 field studies looking at 135 different alien plant species.
Wow. Okay, so with all that data, how did they even start to organize it? Ecology is complex. You can't just average everything together, can you?
No, definitely not. They structured their questions around 3 levels of ecological complexity. Think of it like layers.
Okay.
First, the most direct level, individual species performance. So how does a single native plant or animal fare when an invader arrives? Its fitness, its survival.
Makes sense, the immediate effect.
Then level 2 was community structure. What happens to the whole group of species? Diversity, how many are there, that sort of thing.
The neighborhood effect, maybe?
Kind of, yeah. And level 3 was the biggest picture. Ecosystem processes. This is about the fundamental chemistry and physics, nutrient cycling, soil properties, the big stuff.
Right, the underlying machinery of the ecosystem. That framework seems crucial. Now, did they go in with specific expectations? Any major hypotheses they were testing?
They did. 2 big ones, based on existing ideas. The first was about a specific type of invader, nitrogen fixers.
Ah, the ones that make their own fertilizer, basically.
Exactly. They take nitrogen from the air and put it in the soil. So the hypothesis was, do these N-fixing invaders have a bigger overall ecological impact than plants that don't fix nitrogen? The assumption was yes, they'd be ecological bombshells.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. More nutrients, bigger changes.
Wow.
What was the second hypothesis?
That one was geographic. It focused on islands versus mainlands.
Ah, the classic island vulnerability idea.
Precisely. Are island ecosystems, with their often unique and isolated species, more easily damaged by invaders compared to mainland ecosystems? That was the common wisdom.
Got it. So to test these across, over 1,000 studies measuring different things, biomass, soil end, species count, they needed a common currency, right? How did they standardize?
Yeah, that's where the meta-analysis method comes in. They used a specific statistic called Hejda.
Hedges.
Right. It's what's called a unit-free measure of effect size. Basically, it lets you compare the magnitude and direction of an effect, say, the difference between an invaded plot and an uninvaded one, regardless of what was originally measured.
So it turns kilograms of biomass change in Spain and parts per million nitrogen change in Hawaii into the same kind of score.
Exactly. It puts everything on a level playing field. That's what lets you see these global patterns emerge from all the noise.
Okay, powerful tool. So let's get to the results. What did this massive data set reveal about the impacts, starting at those first 2 levels, species and communities? What happens to the locals?
Well, the overall picture for native species is pretty grim. Alien plants had significant impacts in almost 11 out of 24 of the impact types they measured.
Okay.
And focusing just on the native plants themselves, the numbers are quite stark. Resident plant fitness, their ability to grow and reproduce, dropped by an average of 41.7%.
Wow, that's substantial.
It is. And then at the community level, level 2, plant diversity just plummeted, a decrease of 50.7%.
Half the plant diversity gone.
On average, yes. And native plant abundance also decreased significantly by about 43.5%. So fewer species and fewer individuals of the species that remain.
That is a fundamental restructuring of the plant community, just wiped out or pushed aside. So the invader is clearly winning. Does that translate to the ecosystem just producing less overall? Less diversity usually means less productivity, right?
That's what you'd normally think.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets counterintuitive. Despite that massive drop in native diversity, the total community production actually increased by 56.8% after invasion.
Wait, hang on. How does that work? Diversity crashes, but the overall output goes up? That seems completely backward.
It does, but it points to something called sampling effects. Basically, if the one alien species that comes in is incredibly productive, grows super fast, produces lots of biomass, it can dominate the system.
Ah, I see. So the total production number gets skewed upwards by this one hyper-successful invader, even while all the native specialists are disappearing.
Precisely. The ecosystem becomes, in a way, more productive, but much less diverse. It's productive because of the invader, not because of a healthy, complex native community.
A sort of high-output monoculture, almost. Okay. What about other life? Did these changes ripple up the food web to affect animals?
They did. They found clear bottom-up effects. Those changes in the plant community significantly hit animal populations, too. Animal species fitness decreased by 16.5%, and animal abundance dropped by 17.3%.
So change the plants, and the animals definitely feel it. Makes sense.
Yeah. Altering the base of the food web inevitably has consequences further up.
Okay, let's move to that third level then. Ecosystem processes. The big chemistry changes. What did they find happening in the soil, the nutrient cycles?
This is where the invaders really showed their power to re-engineer the environment. On average, they significantly enhanced several key processes.
Like what?
Available nitrogen in the soil shot up by 53.7%. It's a huge fertilizer effect. Microbial activity also increased by about 32%.
So the soil is becoming much more active, more nutrient-rich.
Yes, and overall pools of nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon increased too by up to 22% or so.
Yeah.
They also found a small but significant decrease in soil pH, making it slightly more acidic. These plants are terraforming, essentially.
They really are ecosystem engineers. But you mentioned something crucial about the timing of these changes relative to the species' impact.
Yes, this is a really key insight for anyone involved in conservation or monitoring. The analysis showed that by the time you can reliably measure these significant changes in ecosystem processes, like the big jump in available nitrogen,
Yeah.
the major damage to the native plant community, that 50% diversity loss, has likely already happened.
So the biodiversity crash is the leading indicator. The chemical changes lag behind.
That seems to be the pattern. The species-level impacts happen first, or at least become obvious first. The big shifts in soil chemistry might take longer to fully manifest or be detected.
That has huge implications for monitoring invasive species, right? If you wait until the soil changes, you've already lost half the native plants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It suggests maybe we should be focusing more on those species and community metrics as early warning signs.
Right. Okay, let's circle back to those two big hypotheses they started with. First, the nitrogen fixers. Did they turn out to be the super impact invaders everyone assumed?
Well, this was one of the big surprises. The answer was sort of, but not really in the way people thought.
How so?
Compared to non-N-fixing invaders, the N-fixers did have a significantly greater impact, but only on nitrogen pools and nitrogen nitrification rates.
Only on the N-related stuff.
Yes. For all the other ecosystem processes, and crucially, for the overall impacts on community structure, like that diversity loss we talked about, there was no significant difference between N-fixers and non-N-fixers.
That's really counterintuitive. So dumping loads of extra nitrogen doesn't automatically mean you cause more damage to the overall community than an invader that doesn't fix nitrogen.
Apparently not, based on this large data set. It suggests that while N-fixation has very specific, strong effects on nutrient cycling, other invasive traits or mechanisms used by non-N-fixers are having equally strong but different impacts on the community structure and other processes. It forces us to be more nuanced than just labeling N-fixers as universally worse.
Huh. Okay, so that assumption needed refining. What about the second hypothesis, island vulnerability, where islands demonstrably hit harder than mainlands?
This was perhaps even more surprising. The study found no significant difference in the average impact magnitude, the effect sizes between studies done on islands and studies done on mainlands.
No difference at all, despite islands often having more alien species established.
Right. It seems that invasion success, the number of species that manage to invade an island, doesn't automatically translate into a greater magnitude of ecological impact at a specific site compared to a similar invasion on the mainland. The impacts were just as severe on the mainland sites studied.
So the idea of islands being inherently more fragile in terms of impact severity wasn't supported by this global data.
Not in terms of the average magnitude of effect size, no. It challenges that long-held assumption pretty directly.
Okay, so taking the surprises into account, the main story seems to be this fundamental decoupling. Diversity goes down, productivity goes up, driven by the invader.
That's a central finding, yes. That ecological trade-off. Now, the authors were careful to point out limitations, of course.
Naturally. What were the main ones?
Well, a lot of the available research focuses on the most obvious dominant invaders. We know less about the impacts of less abundant ones,
Hmm.
and crucially, teasing apart the causal links is still tricky.
You mean, like, is the nitrogen increase directly from the plant itself, or is it because the plant killed off native species that were keeping nitrogen levels lower? Direct versus indirect effects.
Exactly that. Those chains of cause and effect are complex and weren't fully resolved by this type of meta-analysis.
And that leads to what they flagged as a major knowledge gap for actually managing these invasions, right? Something about abundance.
Yes, the relationship between how much of the invader is present at its abundance or cover and the level of impact it causes. They just didn't have enough data consistently reporting abundance alongside impact to model that relationship properly.
So we don't know if the impact grows steadily as the invader spreads a linear relationship.
Or if it's more like a switch flips, maybe nothing much happens until the invader reaches, say, 30% cover, and then suddenly the ecosystem crashes. That would be a threshold or a non-linear relationship.
And not knowing that makes management really hard. If you're a park manager and find a small patch, do you have a minor problem or have you already crossed a critical threshold without realizing it?
That's precisely the problem. Defining that abundance impact curve is critical for risk assessment and deciding where to focus control efforts. We need to know if there are tipping points.
So a clear direction for future research there. Okay, let's try and wrap this deep dive up. What's the main take-home message from Vilà's massive study?
I'd say it's that invasive alien plants cause really significant, but also quite varied, heterogeneous impacts across all ecological levels, species, communities, ecosystems. But the magnitude of those impacts isn't simply predicted by broad categories we used to rely on, like whether it's an island or mainland, or even if the plant is an end fixer or not, except for those very specific end cycle effects. The reality is more complex.
Right. It's not about simple labels. It's about specific interactions in specific contexts, even if the overall trend is negative for native biodiversity.
Exactly. Which leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to consider.
Go on.
If we now know from this kind of large-scale evidence that major impacts on native species diversity loss, abundance drops are often happening before we can easily detect the big changes in things like soil nutrients.
Yeah.
Then how should that change our priorities for monitoring and conservation? Should we be putting much more emphasis on tracking those species-level metrics, the biodiversity itself, as the real early warning system, rather than waiting for the soil chemistry to flag a problem that's already deeply entrenched?